Hello, welcome back to Animated Literacy. In our last session, we completed number 91 of the 91 basic lessons for animated literacy. But before I sign off, I'd like to offer a few final thoughts about the program and some of the basic research that has guided it that I think is most important. When Marian Diamond began her research on neuroplasticity back in the 1960s, the result of that research really placed a lot of responsibility on both parents and teachers. Prior to her research, it was thought that we had no effect in changing the structure of the brain. But what she proved was that the brain is plastic. And in fact, we are always molding the brains of our children and of our students by the way that we teach. So we certainly want to mold those brains in a positive way. And this is one of my favorite quotes from Marian Diamond, where she tells us that an animal is only as smart as it needs to be, and brains will sharpen up when, and only when, experience demands it. She went on to tell us that a simple, boring environment ends up physically shrinking the brain and making it less complex than what would happen in an enriched environment. I had the privilege of hearing Marian Diamond speak a number of times at brain conferences, and she was adamant about this concept. In her early work, she described the best environment for a brain as an enriched environment. Well, in her later workshops, she said that people misunderstood what she meant by an enriched environment. So they were going out and buying fancy electronic toys and gadgets and all of these things to entertain children. What she meant by an enriched environment was a natural environment. And so in her book, Magic Trees of the Mind, she talked about what a natural environment looks like, and that there is a sequence of stages that environments go through when the senses are developing. So before birth, the tactile kinesthetic sense develops first, then comes balance, then comes taste, then smell, and here's where it's really important to our reading instruction, then comes hearing, and last comes vision. Most reading programs are starting here with a visual because they're teaching children letters, they're teaching sight words, they're teaching them to read complete sentences, and they've kind of just skipped over all of these other things. Then she tells us that language all over the world is learned in a highly predictable sequence. And even before number 1 on this list, something else takes place. Children who are fortunate enough to hear songs and sing-songy stories like Dr. Seuss's book Cat in the Hat before birth actually start their language development before they're born, and they'll recognize those rhythmic and melodic songs and stories that they heard before they were born. And so then, once the child is born, she tells us that language develops in this order. First come gestures, and that starts with the baby sticking out his tongue and in response to someone sticking their tongue out at the baby. Then comes vowel sounds. Our reading programs put consonants ahead of vowels in almost every instance. Then come consonants, and when the consonants come in, they're blended with vowels, where if consonants are introduced before vowels, there's no blending that takes place. They're isolating them instead, and the result of that is we got a lot of kids who can't blend. And blending is one of the most critical skills that you have to be able to achieve word recognition. Then come single words, and so the baby starts out with da-da and mama and ba-ba and up, and they'll speak one word at a time. Then after several months of speaking one word at a time, they'll move to 2-word phrases, and then finally to 3-word phrases, and that's where sentences and high-frequency words come into play. Most reading programs start here with high-frequency words and simple, complete sentences without building this foundation that precedes it. So animated literacy spends a lot of time building a sequential foundation. And she tells us in her book of a study done with baby chicks where they purposefully changed the order of development by exposing the chick to light before hatching. And so baby chick is hatched. It can see better than most other chicks, but it turned out to be a very problematic because the baby chicks could not follow their mother's movement or their mother's voice. All they could do was wander aimlessly in circles. And we see a lot of children when they hit the 4th grade slump wandering aimlessly when we put chapter books in front of them with no pictures, and the vocabulary is growing and they have no idea how to handle that. So we must change the way that we go about teaching so that children are prepared for 3rd and 4th grade when the pictures drop out of their books and the vocabulary begins to explode. Her work goes right along with Vygotsky, and this is another of my favorite quotes, where Vygotsky told us that the only good learning is an advance of development. So instead of bringing books down to the child, or in many cases bringing the books down below the child's language development, we need to have books that are up here. And then we need to scaffold so that children can grow into those books. And this is another quote that I'm sure you've heard many times, that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. And that's precisely what we've been doing in our classrooms. Little simple books have dominated the classroom for decades. For nearly 150 years, it was seen that you had to have this progression of extremely simple little books, and then a little bit harder, and then a little harder, and then a little harder. But when you look at language development, this isn't how children learn to speak, and it's not how they learn to communicate and with and understand the world. Instead, before birth, ideally, they're exposed to songs and stories that have complex vocabulary and comprehension, but they're only processing a portion of it. So the first thing they process is the rhythm and melody. Then after birth, they begin to gesture in response to that language. Then at 2 to 4 months old, they're producing the vowels that they've been hearing. At 7 to 8 months old, they're combining vowels and consonants and blending those together. Then somewhere around a year old, they start speaking their first words. And then a few months later, they start speaking in 2-word phrases, then 3-word phrases, and then gradually they climb up to those sentences. And if everything has been built in a sequential order like that, the sentences that children can comprehend and even read and write are much more complex than what we find in most of the beginning reading materials today. This is another quote that is of great concern, and we've known about this for decades, and this was a quote from Jean Schall, who was one of the foremost experts in reading instruction for many years. And she tells us that in the early grades, when books are simple, vocabulary is small, there's lots of picture support, a lot of kids look like they're doing okay. And then they hit 4th grade, and what happens? Their reading stalls, in many cases it backslides, and they may graduate high school reading just like they did in 4th grade. So if we don't change our reading instruction, that's going to continue to happen. This is another important quote, and this starts to define why it is that with all the money that has been spent and all the testing that has been done, children's reading has not improved. That emotion drives attention and memory and problem solving and just about everything that we do. And that it's impossible to learn something we're not attending to. So if we want children to pay attention, we have to provide emotional stimulation. And if we want them to remember what's being taught, we need to connect emotions to everything that we're teaching. And so that's a big difference that drives animated literacy, where under No Child Left Behind, it was admitted that they really didn't look at emotion. They only looked at skills, and they ended up teaching those skills in a manner that looked very much like a test. So every day, children were coming into school, getting worksheets that looked just like the tests they would be taking the end of the year. And I don't know very many people who really enjoy and look forward to taking tests. So certainly we need to test children, but we don't need to organize our instruction to look like a test. And here's another quote, and this is the one I was just mentioning, that emotion drives attention and memory. So if we want children to be successful, we have to provide that emotion. And this is from Ian Robertson, who is a researcher in neuroplasticity in England. And he tells us all of the stimulation in the world won't change the brain unless we pay attention to it. So somehow we have got to pump a lot more emotion into our teaching. This is a quote that talks about emotion is the on-off switch, and it has the power to turn on the learning, or it has the power to turn it off. And then, unfortunately, in many of our programs today, the switch has been left in the off position, and children haven't profited from the instruction that they're receiving. Kistanovich tells us that there are two primary components to reading instruction. One is word recognition, and the other is listening comprehension. And the foundation of word recognition is phonological awareness. The foundation of reading comprehension is listening comprehension. So if we want children to develop those two things, we have to do a lot of work on teaching of sounds, which is auditory, not visual. And we have to read to them a lot and talk about how we connect what we're reading to them to their prior experiences, so they develop comprehension strategies before they're actually able to read the books. There's one piece in word recognition, though, that has not received enough attention. In the 1990s, there were what were termed reading wars between phonics advocates and people who were opposed the teaching of phonics. If you go back to the 1950s, to books like Why Johnny Can't Read, that war was taking place in the 1950s. So that war has been going on for decades. And what it demonstrates to me is that there hasn't been an understanding of how the brain works. Because the phonics advocates were saying, well, if you can sound out a word, then you can read anything. And the anti-phonics people were saying, but listen to my accent, listen to how I pronounce this word, or look at how this word is spelled. It doesn't quite match the way it's pronounced. Or look at letters like O-W. It has two sounds. It can say ow or o. So how do you know which one to use? What they completely missed is that everything that comes into your brain is filtered through your prior knowledge. And so what happens is it is critical that children can rapidly sound out those words by connecting, looking at the letters, connecting the letters to the sounds that they spell, and blending those sounds together. But the process isn't completed when you have done that. Once that's finished, you have to check that combination of sounds with your prior knowledge to see if it matches a word that is stored in your listening vocabulary. And then if it's not, you have to find a word that is similar and change the way you pronounce the word to the way that it's stored in the brain. So you have to constantly monitor what you're sounding out by saying, does it sound right? And does it make sense? And if it doesn't, then you have to change it based on prior knowledge. But if you've not been read to, and you don't have a large vocabulary to be able to monitor with, then you can't do that step. So we have to read to children not just to improve their comprehension skills, but to plant lots of words in their listening vocabulary so that as they're developing the skill to be able to decode those words, they have something to check with. And that process of sounding out those words has to become rapid and automatic, because what we now know about the brain is our conscious memory can't multitask. It can only do one thing at a time. So while your conscious brain is saying, who are the people, places, objects, facts, and events that I'm familiar with that are like those in the story I'm reading, your unconscious mind is sounding out the words. But if you're consciously sounding out the words, then your conscious mind is not available to you for comprehension. So until children become automatic and fluent in their decoding, their comprehension will continue to struggle. So one of the questions I'm asked is, okay, so you finished the 91 lessons, what do I do now? A lot of what you need to do now is continue to work with sounds and letter patterns and move that ability to blend sounds together and to recognize the spelling of those sounds so that it becomes an unconscious process, and that takes time. So just teaching the 91 lessons isn't enough. Children may leave those 91 lessons knowing all the sounds in the language, knowing how to spell those sounds, but they may be very conscious in doing that process, and if they're consciously doing it, then comprehension is going to struggle. So now I want to go through some of the kinds of things that you can do in the review lessons. In the Story, Song, and Action book, there are the 91 lessons that we have been working on. Then following that, there are 91 review lessons. And so if you have finished the 91 basic lessons, you go into the 91 review lessons. And so I want to show you some of the kinds of things that happen in those review lessons. One is that in the 91 lessons, I've been telling the children the stories. But now we want to have the children begin to retell those stories. And so we have a series of sequence cards that can assist children in retelling. And first I may model these. So let's look here at Polly Panda. What do you think Polly Panda is doing here? Oh, she's parachuting. Well, why does she have a parachute? Well, because when she wanted to go to Penelope's Prim and Proper Preschool, there wasn't any place for the plane to land, so the pilot gave her a parachute. What's happening now? Oh, now she's in preschool, and what is she doing? Oh, she's painting. And what do you think she might be painting? Oh, she's painting pretty pictures. Well, who is going to receive the pictures that she's painting? Oh, the parents who visit preschool. And what are they going to pay for those pictures? Oh, they're going to buy them for only pennies apiece. Well, what's happening in your next card? Oh, Polly is still continuing to paint, but I don't see her painting pictures anymore. What is she painting? Oh, she's painting a letter. She's painting a special P. Well, why did she stop painting pictures? Well, she ran out of paper. So what is she painting on now? Well, now she's painting on all of the stuffed animals and objects and things that parents bring to her. What is she doing in this last picture? Oh, she's painting her special letter P. Why is she painting a letter P instead of painting a picture? Well, painting pictures was too slow. She couldn't please enough people. So now she autographs everything that they bring to her by painting a special pink or purple P. Then you can take these sequence cards, mix them up, have the children put them back in order, and have them retell as much of the story as they can. And it's been shown that retelling is one of the best ways to improve comprehension. So now in the 91 basic lessons, they have been learning the 45 characters that represent all the sounds of a language. And they started out black and white like this, and then as each character was introduced, its picture was covered up with a color picture, so that by the time we have completed lesson 91, the children have all of the sounds that they need to decode words. Then we've been playing with those sounds in Frere Jacques. So what does Mimi Mermaid's puppy say? Muff, muff, muff. What does Polly Panda's puppy say? Puff, puff, puff. So we're doing lots of moving sounds around, and we have to keep doing that over and over and over again until that becomes a rapid automatic process. Now in the early stages, children are gesturing the sounds as we're singing them. So they're making their panda eyes going, Polly Panda, then they're showing me painting purple peas. Well, as they're progressing, we want to shift them from the gesturing of the songs to the tracking of the songs. So now we're going to train them how to look at the print. And so here we're moving from the auditory to the visual, just as I talked about that the hearing develops before seeing. Now we're going to really be working on seeing the words that they need to read and write. And so we have enlarged versions in this book of all of the songs in animated literacy, and those can be duplicated and then placed into a songbook like this. And now during one period each day, the children can simply take their finger, put it on the print, and as the recording is going through, they can track the words and sing along. And this is really important because what has been shown is that fluency primarily comes from rereading familiar material. And so those songs provide wonderful material for children to read from. So then at that point now, the children have been introduced to all of those sounds, but we need to keep practicing them. Why? Because they're not fully automatic yet. And so we have to keep practicing the sounds. Then we need to be practicing the letters that represent those sounds, and I've given you lots of activities to do that with. Then at the next stage, we move to the single words. And so we drew our picture of a pup, and because many programs start with the word the, so that this can be integrated with your other instruction, we labeled it with the pup. And so when we wrote pup, it was in small letters, so children are being exposed to how to read and write small letters. And then when we gave it a title, we wrote it in all capital letters. So now children are learning both upper and lowercase letters. And this can be started very early because the techniques I'm using to teach drawing, come from Mona Brooks, who developed all of these techniques in a preschool setting. And these were pictures that were sent to me from a preschool, and these were the pups that the children drew in their preschool. Then for Are You Sleeping, we started out with our first frame. And so here Emma has written, Are you sleeping, sister Emma? Emma's bells are saying, eh, eh, eh. Now for each of our pattern songs, there are several puzzles. So at the early stages, children are simply filling in their words with the puzzle. As they get more advanced and you're getting into the review lessons, there are puzzles for all of those. And the puzzles are available in the beginning and the advanced workbook. And so the simplest of the puzzles will be found in the beginning workbook, and the more advanced puzzles, or the longer ones, will be in the advanced workbook. And if you go to the Story Song and Action book review lessons, it will tell you what page number from each of the workbooks you can go to reinforce that particular lesson. So here's a puzzle for Are You Sleeping? And so here are all the words out of order, and here are boxes down below so that the children can cut out those words, paste them in the correct order down here. And by doing that, they're going to have to reread those words over and over and over again. And we have found that children develop high levels of fluency from this. Also, many children in the early stages just can't sit still long enough to develop fluency by reading from a book. So teachers in first and second grade often report that their kids doing their puzzles are asking, well, teacher, can I stand and do the puzzle? And so they're standing up there and their feet are moving and their hands are moving. And this is especially for some of those really hyperactive kids. They can work on fluency by rereading words over and over and over again as they're working with their puzzle. And then by doing that, they can develop the fluency that is necessary to be able to enjoy books. But they may not be able to enjoy reading those books in the early stages until they develop that fluency. Then the children are drawing their own pictures, and there is so much pride attached to the pictures. And so when we talk about emotion driving attention, I had a group of second graders one year that had all repeated a grade. None of them could read the beginning pre-primer that was provided by the school district when they entered my classroom. So I took all of those books and I put them on the shelf. And I said, we're not going to use those yet, but you can go get one anytime you want. And so I pre-taught everything necessary to read those books without using the books. I taught it all through animated literacy. Then once I was secure that they would be able to pick up that book and read it, I said, okay, today's the day. Go get the book, bring it up. And they read it with total fluency, and they read the next one and the next one. So we can use those simple little books to test children, but I haven't found them to be the most ideal source for teaching children. So then children are moving from drawing their picture of a pup to drawing a pop when we've introduced short O, and then we introduce M, and they're drawing a mom. So every time we draw something, it's going up on our word wall. And so when this page of the word wall is filled, then we add another page, and then another page, and then another page. So we're learning a lot of words, and we can keep coming back to these words and reinforcing them, because again, all of these activities that we're doing now in the review lessons are designed to have children rereading to develop fluency. So now they have been rereading their patterns, and this was the first pattern that we did after Are You Sleeping? And so here we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I caught a fish alive. And now we can use these to reinforce some of those high frequency words. So I can go, can you find the word it? Oh, there it is. What are the sounds in it? It. How do we spell it? IT. And so we can make a kind of a hide and seek out of this and keep finding those high frequency words and then repeating them over and over again. Using Vygotsky, when we first did that, I printed on my page and they copied me. But then later in the year, we can come back to those very same patterns, and I can tell them, this time, do it all by yourself. And the first step in completing any of those patterns is to go to the word wall and choose a word from the word wall, and in this case there's only one word. So once you've chosen that word, you have completed the pattern. But as we get to more advanced patterns, you have more than one word that you have to write. And so here are some examples of ones that kids did all by themselves. And so we want to move children from copying to independence. And now here, there's two words. So the child chose dog from the word wall, and then they had to think of a word that rhymed with dog, and so they did a log, and then they drew their picture to show that they understood what that said. And then here's another one, catch a fox, put him in a box. So the child chose fox from the word wall, and then they had to come up with the word box to rhyme with it. And here's what I was talking about, that when the National Reading Panel looked at fluency, they could only find one way to improve fluency, and that was through rereading with teacher guidance. And so that's what we're doing, is a lot of rereading with teacher guidance. This quote is a really exciting element of language. It's been shown over and over again that children learn to speak their first words very slowly until they reach about 50 words. And then there's an explosion where instead of learning a new word every few days, they now learn 3 to 4 new words a day and learn to comprehend 7 or 8 new words a day. And this happens at all of those stages that I was showing you. If we teach children in a sequential manner, as I'm advocating, then at the end of each of those stages, there's an explosion. If we don't teach them in a sequential manner, instead of an explosion, we get lots of slumps. So that's what the 4th grade slump is that we haven't taught in a sequential manner and covered everything. And so now the children hit 4th grade and their learning seems to just stop. So now I've modeled for you that each time a new drawing is introduced, there's a picture page that they can copy on their own after doing the drawing lesson with the teacher. And then there's a puzzle down here at the bottom. And the puzzle starts with just 4 words, the pup is up. So now they can cut out these, and if your children are struggling with this, you can take a paper cutter and cut this off, and then all they have to do is 3 snips and put the puzzle pieces there. Then they can take and fold that, now it appears on the back, and they can write it, and then they can illustrate it down here at the bottom. Now as children are getting more advanced, instead of writing it the way it is here, the teacher can take these and they can put a star next to a word. So I put a star next to pup. Now the star tells them when you turn your page over on the back, don't write pup, write something else. So what else could be up? Oh, the cat could be up, the dog could be up, mom could be up. Then you could change up. So now I put 2 stars. So now they have to change 2 stars. And so they can write a sentence that they have composed part of it, and I've composed part of it. And so here's a picture of a child who's folded their page, and they're have written the words on the back, and now they're tracking them with their finger and showing me the words. Now in the beginning workbook, the puzzles get a bit more advanced. In the Story, Song, and Action book, all of the sentences have just 1 line. And these puzzles introduce high-frequency words in a highly systematic fashion. So what I've done with the puzzles is I've combined the words that we've learned to draw with high-frequency words so that children can be exposed to the high-frequency words while they're learning to read and write the words that they have learned to draw. And so here's some examples from the beginning workbook. And you can see now that the sentence is getting a bit longer and there's more high-frequency words in each sentence. Also in the beginning workbook, you'll find pages like this for each character, where the words are listed up at the top, and in order to be effective, you have to have done your drawing lessons that include all of these words before the child is given the worksheet. One teacher said, oh, my kids aren't successful at that. And I said, well, have you done the drawing lessons? Oh, well, I'm not comfortable drawing. Well, there is no substitute for the drawing. I wasn't comfortable drawing. I had to learn to draw. And the drawings that I'm doing, taking you step by step, are ones that anybody can do. And so I'm kind of where if I can draw it, my kindergartners can draw it. And so here's another example of a page where the children are labeling. Then the directions down here say when you have finished your labeling, turn your page over on the back and choose 2 pictures from the front that you want to include in a sentence. So now they're going to have to write a sentence that includes 2 nouns. Once we have learned to label all of our pictures, then we start to label all the parts of the picture. So here's a pup with all the parts that we've labeled, and you can see from this that we're getting into a lot more spelling patterns now. And so here's an example of one of the students' pages where they're labeling the parts of their tiger. I can also take, as we're doing these pages, and have them copy a sentence that's similar to the sentence that is being used in the little book that my district was using to teach reading. So I'm actually teaching the sentence structures and vocabulary, once again without the little book, and then once the children are successful at reading and tracing it here and writing it, then I take out the little book and they have no problem reading it to me. And here's another example of a child with an elf, and a common sentence that you see in those little books is I see a or I see an, and they had to write what it is that they're seeing there. Now as you're getting into parts, Wheels on the Bus deals in parts. So this is a great pattern song to plug any of those parts into. So you can sing about the tail on the dog, the tail on the cat, the eyes on the dog, the fur on the bunny, and keep rewriting Wheels on the Bus over and over and over again. Now following that natural progression, once children are good at labeling pictures and the parts of pictures, we're going to move into phrases. And so we start to introduce adjectives. And we began with color words, but then we moved to more complex adjectives. So I'm reading to them from books that have lots of adjectives, making charts of those adjectives. And then when we come to doing our labeling, they're using the words from the chart to label their picture so that we're expanding both their listening, their reading, and their writing vocabulary. And so here I went back to the pup again. And so one of the things you can do in reviewing is you can go back to some of the favorite drawings that you did earlier and then change the way you label those drawings. So the drawing remains the same, but the labeling is different each time. And so here's some samples of my kids where they're not just labeling the parts, but using some words to describe the parts. And then finally, they get more and more advanced, and they stop drawing the pictures that I've drawn. They draw their own pictures, and they go back and do a lot of complex labeling, and then they write a sentence about the picture that they've been doing. The first half of the lessons that I modeled from the 91 basic lessons, when we went to a drawing lesson after introducing a character, I was drawing just one thing. But in the later ones, I began to draw more than one. And so here we had been introduced to the sound of B, and we had drawn a bus. But I didn't stop there. Instead, we put 2 different kinds of bats onto that bus and did more labeling. This is from Orty Orson, and so we drew a picture of the orangutan named Orty Orson, but we also drew a horn and a jug with a cork and a fork and corn and a horse. So I have modeled these during the lessons, but you don't have to draw them all. You have to make a decision about where your kids are. And if your kids are not ready to do that many drawings, then you can draw as many as they're ready for and save the others for the review lessons and as you're coming back and going through all of the characters again. And here, after we had done Orty, we put her in to Mary wore her red dress. So we wrote, Orty wore her orange shorts, orange shorts, orange shorts. Orty wore her orange shorts all day long. Now I found that in many cases, my kids were struggling a bit when it came to drawing their own pictures and doing their labeling independently. So in both the beginning and the advanced workbook, I supplied pages like this, where I wrote the nouns here and they had to choose the nouns to put inside the circles. Then I put either adjectives or verbs over here, and they didn't have to choose those. They could either choose the adjectives that they wanted from this chart, or they could choose adjectives from anywhere. And so they would complete their page, and then they'd write their sentence down at the bottom. And this child wrote, "This strong ape has wrinkled fingers and a funny, scary nose." So you can see in their writing, they're actually beginning to use a lot of that vocabulary that we have used for labeling. Then that same child turned their paper over on the back And they wrote this to go along with it. They wrote, "The ape is hairy, the ape is scary. I see an ape, the ape is funny." So that's some pretty nice writing, and you can see they're really utilizing all those words that have been introduced. Here's a book called Barnyard Dance from Sandra Boynton. It's a very popular children's book. And these are all the verbs that come from that book. So we can chart those verbs, and then we can start to use those verbs in our drawing and labeling. So here again, we went back to the pup, but this time we didn't just do nouns and adjectives, we added verbs to our labeling. And then here's a page from either the beginning or advanced workbook where once again, I've set it up. I provided nouns here and I provided verbs here, and the children chose the words to complete their labeling. Then they went down to the bottom and wrote a sentence. And this child wrote, "This kid reads while the tub sinks. The cub chortles while he reads." Well, how do they come up with a word like chortles? It was in one of the books I read to them that we charted. This is a fun one that one of the kids wrote. This one says, this one they're labeling a bone and an ice cream cone and a phone, so we're reinforcing the long O sound. Then down at the bottom, the child writes, "My friend Alex is calling me, but I am giving my dog a bone." So she's just too busy to answer the telephone because she's giving her dog a bone. Then they start to use those verbs in their pattern songs, and so here Ashley has written, "Ashley, Ashley, what can you do? Skip to Maloo, my darling. I can shop like a mom, skip to Maloo, my darling." Then, as I showed you earlier, all of the pattern songs have been included in either the beginning or the advanced workbook. And the children cut out their pieces, and these gradually get longer and longer with more and more words. Then they turn their page over on the back, and they rewrite the song. So on the front, this one says, "Down on Grandpa's farm, there is a woolly black sheep. The sheep, it makes a sound like this, ba, ba." Child turns it over on the back and writes, "Down on Grandpa's farm, there is a green rattlesnake. The snake, it makes a sound like this, hiss, hiss." And here this child did their puzzle for "Here we go round the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush." And then she turns her page over on the back and writes her own version of it, where she writes, "Here we go round the puppy dog, the puppy dog, the puppy dog. Here we go round the puppy dog so early Monday morning." And this child has done a puzzle for one elephant, only this version wasn't one elephant. It was two green frogs went out to play upon a big wet log one day. They had such enormous fun that they called for another green frog to come. Well, when she turns it over on the back, she writes this. One ladybug went out to play upon a big waterfall one day. They had such enormous fun that they called for another ladybug to come. And this is when you really start to see a lot of creativity from the children. This one was from the song 10 in the Bed. And so on the front it reads, 10 pups in a bed, and the little one said, roll over, roll over. And they all rolled over, and one fell out, and then there were 9. Subtraction. So if you subtract 9 from 10, how many do you get? 1. So child turns it over on the back, and they write their own version, and they write 10 kittens, little kittens in 10 kittens in a mitt, and the big one said, roll over, and they all rolled over, and 10 fell off, and then there were none. Subtraction. So if you subtract 10 from 10, what do you have left? You have none. And then this one rewrote the 5 little ducks. 5 little ducks went out one day over the hills and far away. Mother duck said quack, 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 but only 4 little ducks came back. And she wrote on the back, 5 little kids went out one day under the bridge and far away. Teacher said, come back to school, but only 1 little kid came back. So they have a really good time rewriting those. Then also in the advanced workbook, there's a puzzle for each one of the character songs. And so here the child has put the song together from Baby Barnaby. And on this one, instead of rewriting the song, I said, choose a topic that you want to write about from the front. Well, one of Baby Barnaby's topics is a bumblebee. So the child turns their page over on the back and writes, bumblebees can sting you, and some people are allergic to bumblebee stings. Bees sting because you are bother them, and bees die when they sting people. The end. So those are some of the activities that you can do when you have completed the 91 lesson plans. Your objective is that children continue to develop more vocabulary, that they develop more fluency by getting faster and faster at manipulating sounds, that they're developing more information as you're reading to them, and then eventually they're able to apply that to read on their own. And if you keep up that process of continuing to work on word recognition through developing phonological awareness to automatic levels, you continue to match those to the letters and the letter patterns that are used to spell them, and you continue to put input vocabulary and prior knowledge by reading to kids, eventually it all comes together and kids are successful and they don't hit the fourth grade slump. Instead, they hit a fourth grade explosion where they take off and they're independent and enjoying reading for the rest of their lives. So I hope you've enjoyed the series. If you have any questions or any comments, please feel free to email us, and you can go to our website for the email address. And I wish you great success in teaching children how to read and write. I think the most fun thing that a teacher could ever do and the most fulfilling. So enjoy.